afternoon, everybody, and I hope you've enjoyed the Insight Technology show so far. This is going to be the last keynote of the day, and I'll just quickly introduce myself so you know who I am. I know it's been on the PA a few times, but my name is Bill Gallop, and I look after mobility here at Insight. I come from an Apple background, and I guess that's a very relevant thing with mobility, because for most people, mobility really means iPad and iPhone. And I certainly will mention this later on, we're not restricting ourselves to that. I mean, there's a lot of platforms for mobile devices out there, and a lot of customers can get great benefit from adopting those mobile technologies. But I want to start off asking you some questions. I'm going to put some pictures up on the screen, and I want you to think to yourself what these pictures mean to me. Some very simple questions. What do you think when you see them? How do you feel about them? And what's your attitude to those pictures? Now, I'll run through them reasonably quickly. We'll zoom out a little bit. Reasonably challenging set of images. Let's have something a bit of nature. Nice dragonfly. But let's zoom out again. So what do those things mean to you? In themselves, those pictures and the things that they depict don't actually mean anything. A piece of wire is a piece of wire. It's only when you give it some context that it becomes something that you have an attitude about, something that means something to you. Essentially, the difference is what your perspective is. So I'm going to show you another picture now and ask you what your perspective on this is. That's a mobile device. What does it mean to you? How do you see that? Do you see that as your friend, or do you see that as your enemy? Now, depending on what you think, probably depends on what part of the business you're from. My guess is, if you're a user, you probably see this as your friend. If you're an IT person, you may well see this as your enemy. Again, it's all a matter of perspective. The device itself, the tablet, the smartphone, whatever, in itself is neither. It's an inanimate object. It's not a force for good, it's not a force for bad. It's not a friend, it's not an enemy. You may well see mobile technology as something that opens up your business. It revolutionises the way you work, and it allows you to interact with your customers in new and exciting ways. You may see mobile technology as something that opens up your business. It revolutionises the way you work. It gives you new and exciting ways to lose data. So the question for you is it a friend or an enemy? And really, you are the one that's got the choice. It's up to you what you do about it. And your choice is really, how am I going to treat these devices? Because, frankly, we talk about waves in the business. There's a wave coming. Mobility, consumerization. This is a wave that's coming to all businesses, and it's your choice what you do about that. You could enjoy the ride. You could say, I'm going to adopt that, I'm going to do something about it, I'm going to have a fun time. Or you could say, it's not for me, and then what happens? The wave hits you. The only thing you haven't got an option is to pretend it's not there. You can't be like King Canute. You can't say, not for me, I'm going to stand there, I'm going to hold back mobility, I'm going to hold back consumerization. You've got two choices. Enjoy the ride or get washed away. Let's say you're a consumer, you're a home user. We'll go back to our person who thought of the tablet as a friend. Well, what am I going to do? I buy the tablet, I buy the smartphone, I set up my email on it, I'll use it for accessing the World Wide Web, I probably set up a social network or two, Facebook, Twitter, etc., whatever the current flavour is. And I'll probably use it for playing games. And I'll probably use it for playing games. Use is an important word here, because for me as a consumer, that's all it really means. It means contacting people, whether it be email, whether it be social networks. It means playing games. It means accessing the web. And use is also very important as a business user. However, it's really only part of the equation, because for business users, it's not just about how we use the technology that's important. What we also need to think about is how we're going to manage it. And also, if we're going to manage it, we may decide that our policy is that we aren't going to manage devices. But as a result of that, we have to take some other decisions. So the next thing you need to think about beyond manage the device, how am I going to provide access on the device? Access to networks, to data, etc. We then talk about usage. And finally, now we've got these powerful devices in our pockets, how can we use them to interact? Now, in order to help make this seem a little bit easier for you to remember, makes a nice little acronym. Manage, access, use, interact. MARI. And if we get this right, we can be sitting on the beach in MARI, looking after our mobile devices and doing whatever we need to do in our daily job. So let's look at management. Often it's one of the first things that people think about, certainly from an IT perspective. Oh, I can't have iPads in my business. How on earth am I going to manage them and control them? It's not just about iPads, though. I mentioned earlier on, we deal with a number of platforms. So what sort of platforms are we talking about? There's the iOS, Android, and we're talking smartphones now. We could be talking about Windows Mobile. And probably quite relevant with what's happened in the past week with announcements from a number of vendors. We've also got Windows 8 on mobile devices and also BlackBerry. So there's a number of different mobile platforms we have to consider. But from a management perspective, there's one that stands out above the others. And it's one that, if you're a traditional IT person, might be quite surprising. Because the platform that's easiest to manage, the platform that has the richest set of APIs, is the Apple one. Now, certainly Android is a great platform if you're a techie. If you're a tinkerer and you want to have a device that you can play with, you can control, you can do whatever you want to, you can get under the hood and fiddle with, Android is a brilliant platform for that. However, from a corporate perspective, I frankly don't want my users to be able to do that on a device that I'm supporting. And Apple, with what's perceived as a closed infrastructure, actually provide the management APIs to cover an awful lot of what you need. And this is done through a thing that is called mobile device management. It's been available on a variety of mobile platforms for a good few years. You probably know it more by the acronym, though, MDM. And what does mobile device management allow us to do? Well, let's have a look. Here's an iPad, and this may be one that one of my users has bought, and I have a look at it and I think, well, I don't really want them to use everything that's on there. There's a few things that I want to get rid of. For a start, I don't want them to have access to YouTube. We'll take that away. We'll take away the App Store, and we'll take away iTunes. So with a mobile device management platform, I can actually configure the device and remove some of these standard options. The next thing I can do is I can decide that I want to have some applications on that device for my users. But instead of making my users go to an app store of some description and download them, I can push those applications out. This particularly works well with applications that I've had written for me. And in the US at the moment, Apple have a scheme whereby you can purchase applications in volume, and that is coming to the UK and a number of other territories in the not too distant future. And once you do that, you can then push those applications out to the device. So you can provision those applications out to your users, you can remove some things you don't want them to do, and the other thing you can do is you can provision accounts. You can set it up set up on their Exchange account to enable them to get working straight away. And you'll do that through a portal. The user logs in, put in, say, their Active Directory credentials, and automatically the device gets configured for them. We take away the things we don't want, we add the things we do, we put on the accounts that the user needs. So what sort of things can we manage through mobile device management? Well, I talked about provisioning. Things like our email, our calendaring, our address books, our to-do lists and what have you, they can all be tied up to Exchange servers or other corporate servers. We can control hardware. We can turn cameras off. You may have very sensitive locations whereby you want to remove the camera facility from a device. And you can do this from a geographic perspective as well. You can say that within certain territory around my factory or around my R&D facility, we won't permit the cameras. But elsewhere in the country, or when they're abroad, we'll quite happily let them have the cameras on the device. We can turn off Siri. Now that's a voice recognition software, and it was probably in the news about 3-4 months ago where IBM banned Siri within their premises. So what they did was they used mobile device management to turn off Siri. We can control our mobile data so that we can stop people being able to roam onto other data networks, so they go abroad and they can make phone calls, but we don't allow them to do data roaming, or maybe we can turn off their voice roaming. So we've got control of that. We've also got control of things like passcodes. And you may notice on these devices you've got a simple 4-digit passcode. Well, you can make that passcode more complex. You can make it an alphanumeric. You can force special characters in there. You can do password rolling so that you can't use the same password every 60 days, that sort of thing. Other things we can do is we can turn on and off consumer services. It may not be appropriate in your business for people to be able to go to the App Store, download their own apps, to download music. iCloud is one that people often want to be able to turn off because you don't want your data being synchronized up to somebody else's servers that's in the US that could be subject to Homeland Security Act and things like that. So you may want to say, let's turn that off so we've got control of where that data goes, and we'll also turn off YouTube while we're at it. We can also do hardware inventory on the device. So we can check what version of operating system's on there. So let's say, we're currently on iOS 5.1. Let's say 5.1.1 comes out. There's a security patch in there. We want to make sure that our users are on that. Unfortunately, we can't force the operating system upgrade out to them. But what we can do is audit what they're on and put a message on the screen saying, you need to upgrade because XYZ, there's a security issue. And if you don't do it within the next 2 days, we're going to switch off your Exchange. So give a bit of an incentive for people to do that. We can then look at what the battery utilization, we can look at what apps are on there, so we can then create whitelists and blacklists. So maybe we are going to give our users the freedom to put whatever they want on the device, but we say, you put whatever you want in there, but we're not going to let you have Angry Birds for whatever reason. And again, we can't necessarily remove that, but once we've identified it, we can then put the flags in there for the user. Here's an irritating message that says you've got to remove it. If you don't remove it, I'll then start putting that message up once an hour. If you still don't remove it, I'll put it up every 5 minutes. If you still don't remove it, I'll take your Exchange access away. So again, it's very carrot and stick. So that's all about the management side of mobile devices. The next thing I mentioned was access. And what are we talking about access to? 3 things. First thing we'll talk about access to is accessing your network. Then, how do we access our data? And finally, how do we make sure that that access to our network and our data is secure? So, looking at network first of all. Wireless provision. Now, important thing to note about 3G is that, as I said before, we can control roaming. Wi-Fi, well, just standard Wi-Fi access is sometimes a bit hit and miss. I mean, do I want to give users passwords and tell the user that they go into this building, they have to put that password in, what have you? So what we can do is we can provision those out to the users automatically. so that they have on their device already, when they walk into a building, the username and password that they need to access that network. Not necessarily the best and most secure thing in the world, because what happens then if you as a user bring your device in? And you've got the username and password, so we could then look at integrating with Radius servers and having secure access controls, authenticating against your Active Directory. We can look at certificate-based access. So we pass a certificate out to the device, and then we've got a very secure, very usable form of wireless access that allows our users to roam around from building to building, from Wi-Fi network to Wi-Fi network, and they never have the information required to log onto the network. So that helps in keeping your network secure. The other thing, of course, is they're not necessarily in your network. So we have to think about VPN access. And we've got support from people like Cisco, from Juniper, from F5, and those things can again be provisioned out with either RSA tokens or with certificate-based access to give you secure access into your business network no matter where your users are. So that's network access. The next one up is access to data. I'll put up 3 data provisioning services, let's call them that. And I'll just try and gauge who's the IT managers in the room when I see your faces. We've got Dropbox, we've got Google Drive, and we've got Microsoft SkyDrive. And I don't mean SkyDrive Pro, I'm talking about the consumer SkyDrive. Quite an interesting one actually, because SkyDrive, I think it was yesterday or the day before, made some changes to their terms of service, allowing them to do a few things with your content that's on SkyDrive to enable them to help make the service better. And that's similar sort of language to what Google used on their Google Drive that was interpreted by a number of people as in they can do whatever they like to my data. And Dropbox as well. And it's one that irritates a lot of IT managers because everybody uses Dropbox. And the reason they use Dropbox is it's easy. They've made it very simple for people to get data from a desktop computer to a mobile device and from one user to another very simply. And often the IT networks don't provide them with that sort of facility. They may have disabled the USB drives, USB ports, so they can't plug a memory stick in there. And this may be the only way that they can do it. Now, for me, they're not very encouraging in a corporate market. So I'm going to make those disappear for a moment. They're always there in the background, but I will make them disappear. And talk about another type of product. And these are ones that come from people like Absolute Software and from AirWatch. These are secure content repositories that sit on the device. And you, as the administrator, it doesn't have to be a top administrator, you can assign different levels of privilege, can push documents out to these devices. So you've got that secure container, you push the document out to it. The other thing you can do is you can pull the documents out of it. You can control whether people have access to a document depending on where they are. Much as I mentioned with the camera, you can geolocate. So I'm in a particular building, I have access to something. I walk out of the building, that access disappears. I can also do it time-based. So my users may only have access to those documents during their working day. And at the end of the working day, they disappear again. A very important thing I can do is I can encrypt them. So I can put a password on that document so the user can't open it. I can also have and this is the important thing, I can have control over what happens to that document. I can stop people forwarding it via email. I can stop people opening it up in other applications. And that's really why this sort of thing is really the enterprise, the corporate way of getting data back and forth to your mobile device. Because that last one is the important one. You, as the IT person, has control. The business has control. You can make sure, unlike SkyDrive, the Google Drive, the Dropboxes of the world, you have control over what happens to your data. And how does data flow around? I'll put the iPad up here again because it's the most popular and the most controllable. But it's also one that's not necessarily well understood as to what happens with documents. So let's put our iPad back up on screen. And we've got our documents up on our server. In this case, we'll have a WebDAV server, quite a popular way of getting documents out to mobile devices. And we'll stick a Word document up on there. Now, I'm a user, and I've got a couple of apps on my iPad that I can access Word documents with. Documents to Go and Office 2. Now, I want to access the Word document from those applications. Well, each of those applications lives in their own secure container. And it's one of the ways that you're able to control what application has access to what document. So I go and open that document from the server. Unlike traditional desktop PCs and desktop Macs and laptops and what have you, if I double-click that document that's on the server and I want to open it, with those guys, I open it over the network. What actually happens is that document gets copied to the secure container for that application. I then change my mind, and I want to open it in Office 2. Well, another copy gets made from the server to the container for Office 2. I'll make a change in Documents to Go, and I save that change. That change only lives in the container for Documents to Go. So we then have to start thinking about, okay, how are our users going to work with this? Because that user's opened that document, they think they've made a change, and they think it's on the server for everybody else. So we then have to start getting some best practices in place to make sure the users know that they need to copy things back to servers, and they need to make sure that that document is not just on their device. And looking at those secure devices, we'll put Absolute Safe up this time. And that's one of these containers. So we've got our document in Absolute Safe. And that's been pushed out there by my IT department. And I want to open it up in Office 2. Well, Absolute Safe and Office 2 both live in their own little containers. So I want to open my document up. It gets copied across. And I open it up in Office 2. I make a change to it. That change only lives in Office 2. I then want to email it to somebody, and off it goes. So that comes back to what I talked about earlier on, about secure and control. I can apply policy to things like Absolute Safe and to other document repositories that stop me, first of all, being able to open that document in another application. So that first step can't happen. I can also, obviously, if I can do that, stop it being emailed out. Because that document that I supplied securely in an encrypted form into a user's repository that was only available to that user at a specific time, at a specific location, because I didn't set the flag on can't open another application, has now just disappeared out of my company and out into the wilds. So you've got to start thinking about these things. So there's our secure setup, and this time I've got Keynote and I've got Office 2 again, and they're both in their secure containers. Well, around those secure containers, we actually have other layers of security, and that's one of the ways that the iPad works. And that's all secure, AES 256 encryption, lovely. And that's got certificate-based encryption, so we know that we've got the right chain of authority, chain of trust there, so we put a nice padlock on that and secure it. And this is a thing you need to watch out for your users. Because what I'm going to do is apply a very popular thing called a jailbreak. I'm going to put, there we go, there's our Absinthe jailbreak, goes onto the device, but because I want to install some applications that I've not been allowed to install, or I want to access some feature, what have you. Unfortunately, the way jailbreaks work is they break the chain of trust. In order to be able to install applications, that padlock's open, our certificate and basically our encryption goes up in smoke, as do our secure containers, and we then expose our data. So anybody can come along and swipe your data. So again, it's important when looking at mobile device management solutions that you look at solutions that can detect jailbreaks, they can detect rootkits, whatever terminology you want to use on whichever platform you're using. Because once users are allowed to do that sort of thing, security's out the window. So let's make our device nice and secure again. The next thing we may want to say is, well, what happens when that device gets lost? I've left it in the back of a taxi, something like that. Well, good thing is we can geolocate devices. Generally, if you've got a 3G chipset on the device, you can find out where that device is. And this is again one of the reasons that the iPad and the iPhone are getting very popular in business, because we're certificate based on our encryption, and what I can do is remotely blow that certificate away. And blowing the certificate away is like losing the keys to my safe. The stuff's still in my safe, but I can't open it. And once I've blown the certificate away, it's as good as destroyed that data. And then in the background, the device can get on and actually wipe the data itself. So mobile device management solutions, again, allow us to not only remotely locate the device, but remotely wipe it. And that's the sort of thing that you can do that sort of stuff out of Exchange. You don't have to have a fully fledged MDM solution. So what sort of use can we put our mobile devices to? What sort of benefits can we get? Well, standard stuff, I've already talked about this, is our mail, our calendaring, our address book, our to-do lists. That's probably why a lot of people get a mobile device in the first place, because they want to have access to this stuff on the move. Now that's all well and good, but there's a lot more we can do. The first thing I'll talk about is CRM solutions. Giving our users in the field, whether they be sales, whether they be technical, whether they be looking after logistics, the ability to have live data connections back to our customer relationship systems. And that's one that's going to be talking to Microsoft CRM. So we can have a Microsoft CRM solution delivered onto the iPad. They're not the only game in town, though. Another one you could look at potentially is from SAP, and that's SAP Business by Design. And there you've got something from one of the leaders in CRM solutions and ERP solutions that's actually web-based. So you can deliver it through the cloud, and you have a mobile client that sits on your iPad, and you can, at a moment's notice, look at how your business is performing, how you can interact with your business, and how you can make your staff more, for want of a better word, usable. And if we want to know how our business is performing, names like business objects and crystal reports. A lot of enterprises, a lot of businesses are already using those, but we can deliver analytics data out to tablet devices so that we can see live data of how our business is performing. And we can also do what-if modelling. It's quite nice to be able to stick your fingers on the screen and move a pie chart around or move sliders around on a graph and say, well, what if I made this small change? What would the impact be? And it's good that there are these potted solutions available for you, but it's also a very important thing to remember that you can, across all the platforms there, develop your own solutions. You can have solutions written for you by a third party, you can have in-house developers. They can be web-based solutions, they can be native applications, and then with solutions such as installees from Aperion, we can actually push those out to our mobile devices without even managing them. So I can have a user that has their own device. I don't want to apply any management to that device whatsoever, but I want to make sure that they've got the applications that I've had written on their device with its data in a secure container that I can revoke anytime I want to and pull it off their device. And when that application gets updated, I can push an updated version out to them. So this whole mobile application management piece is very useful when you've had applications written for you or you write them in-house. And they'll enable you to create a web store where you can have either on Apple or on Android, a store where the users can go in and download that self-service, or you can push those out. So that's about usage. But there's a real benefit once you've got a mobile device. And once you start looking at a mobile business, of how we interact with each other. If I'm in the office, I'll often see people wandering by, need to talk to you about something. I'll jump up, I'll grab them, I'll have that interaction with them. If I'm communicating with somebody over email, they say, what is it, 30%, maybe less of the intent behind a message is actually in the words. So if I'm a mobile user and all I've got at my hands is email, text, those sort of communications, and I can add a bit extra by putting voice communications in there, I'm still losing a lot of the benefit that I'll have in the office. So how can we use mobile devices to help us interact with our colleagues, not just the colleagues that we would normally sit across the hall from, but colleagues that we'd never otherwise get to meet that are on the other side of the world that may actually have an impact on your business. And that comes back to something that we do as a consumer. We chat, we talk, we use Facebook, we use Skype, we use Twitter. And I'm not actually decrying these, because if you're talking to your customers, these may well be valid ways of communicating. Although sometimes you do have to be a bit careful. I don't know if anyone's a Formula One fan, but Lewis Hamilton was a little indiscreet with some McLaren data on Saturday, which he just tweeted out to the world. And I then saw the guys from Red Bull Racing on Sunday saying, yeah, great, thanks Lewis, we had a good look at that, it's very interesting. So you do often, even though you're using these consumer technologies, have to make sure that you've got the human resource policies in there, the custom and practice, because these things you are never going to manage from a technological standpoint. You can't use technology to manage an HR problem or an HR process. It's also come to light today. We're in the middle of a cabinet reshuffle. And instead of there being a press release coming out of number 10, we had Baroness Vorsi telling us that she's no longer, she chair of the party. Or we have Ken Clark's moved on to minister with some sort of roving portfolio. And that's all gone out on Twitter, well ahead of any official communication. Now, I said they're great when we're talking to people outside of our business. But if we're talking about things within our business, we don't necessarily want to put interdepartmental communications up on Facebook or Twitter for the world to read. And that's where solutions like, it used to be called Cisco Quad, it's in the middle of being rebranded to Cisco WebEx Social come in. Because these sort of things allow you to set up within your business essentially Facebook and Twitter for the business. So you can then have teams coordinating, teams talking, posting notes as to how their progress is going, commenting on things that other people have done, putting announcements out there. You don't end up with a long chain of email that goes from person to person to person. That somebody's just joined the business, so did they get that email or not? Well, actually, it's already been posted up on the board that's relevant for them. So that's a very useful way of, and that's, as you see there, that's the mobile client for it. So no matter where that user is, they can take part in that conversation. And taking the conversation a little bit further, from Cisco, we've also then got the Jabber client. Now Jabber you may think of as just a text-based program, much like Microsoft Messenger or something like that. And that is what it sits behind. I mean, for example, Apple's iChat server is XMPP based. It's the same protocol that Jabber runs, but we can do more with that. You see there's the little green light next to people's names to say that that person's there. I can be having a chat with them. I've got presence. I can see somebody's logged in. So what can I do once I'm having a chat with them? I'm at home, I'm in Starbucks or wherever. I need to do a little bit more. So let's turn this into a video conversation. Because tablets and smartphones have all got good cameras on them. They've got good connectivity. So let's make some use of them. Let's not see those cameras as a negative. Let's see them as a positive. So I'm having a chat with somebody on my IM, and I need to go a bit further. I can then have a voice and video call with them. And meetings are a bit of a pain, We can organise our web-based meetings, and this is Cisco WebEx. And much the same way as you would use WebEx on the desktop, we can then participate in that conference that somebody's having. And we've got a number of people here, and they could be coming in off Polycom cameras, off the big Cisco telepresence systems, or off that camera that's built into your tablet. So you can then be participating and see who's talking, and if needs be, go one-to-one with somebody and do a bit of text chat whilst you're in the middle of that conversation, or take it to a one-to-one video call. So these sort of things are what you really got to be thinking about for interaction. We've got the devices. There's some features in there that really help us bridge the gap between sitting at the office and working mobile. Because your office really used to be 4 walls and a desk. Going forwards, an individual's office is not going to be 4 walls and a desk. It's going to be wherever they're working. And in order to make sure that those individuals are not isolated, we've got to be thinking about the CRM type solution so we can allow people to talk to each other and track what's happening with their business. We've got to be talking about these sort of video conference or voice conferences or text chat or internal Facebooks and Twitters that allow us to get access to each other's data and allow us to understand what other people are doing and form loose organizations of people that have a common interest, because it may be through this sort of thing you find other people in your business that are having the same problem that maybe work out of a different office that you would never normally come across at the water cooler or the coffee machine or something like that. So it then becomes an enabler of real change within the business. And that's the interactivity around person to person. What about documents? I mentioned earlier on those secure containers where we can push documents out to people, and we can set different levels of policy as to who can access and what you can do with it. Well, there's another form of document where we have things on a library, on a shelf, and we want people to have access to that. And that's something like SharePoint. And this is a mobile SharePoint client called Share Plus. There are others available. And so we can access straight into our SharePoint repository. But not only can we access our SharePoint repository, we can make sure that those documents are synchronized so that we can choose to take documents on the road with us. And when we're in a high bandwidth connection in our office, we synchronize the document, make sure we've got the latest version of it, because we've got some revision control here, so we can see the version history of that particular document. And when I make the edits to it, that will then get saved back to the SharePoint server when it synchronizes. So it takes us away from the problem I mentioned earlier on of accessing a document off the server and that document being copied to the device. I make a change and only I see that change. With things like SharePoint solutions, yes, you can have a cached copy of that document that allows you to access it when you've got no 3G access. Yesterday I came up last night, I was in a motorway services, and you'd think that somewhere like that I got good access. I was sat in the coffee bar, I had no 3G whatsoever, and I didn't fancy signing onto their Wi-Fi and giving them my email address so they could then use that for marketing purposes. So with something like this, I could have those documents cached, I can have access to them, I can make changes, and next time I have got good connectivity, it can get synced back up to the server. So, I mentioned earlier on that we have 2 ways of looking at it. We have the consumer that's worried just about use, all the things I'm going to do with my device. And we have the business user who's concerned about how do I manage it, how do I use, how do I access, how do I interact. Well, what's happening really is that our business user and our consumer user are increasingly becoming the same person. Increasingly, it's becoming the same device. And what happens is the boundary between what's personal, what's business, what's company owned, and what is employee owned is breaking down. And that can actually be a very good thing. Because if once those boundaries start to get a bit fuzzy, then there's a good chance that my employees may sit at breakfast looking through their email on their smartphone. and doing some sort of action on it at 7:30 in the morning when they don't normally start work till 9. Great. But there's tit for tat there. If I'm going to expect or encourage my employees to do that sort of thing, it's also probably quite reasonable for me to not be too concerned that at some point during the day they're on their personal Facebook site updating their profile or pushing some pictures up there. Now these things all become quite fuzzy, and if you're not careful, the whole thing then suddenly starts to fall apart. Because you've got personal data, you've got business data, it all gets mushed up together. That's where I came back to at the beginning. It's all about perspective. It's all really about how you view that device and what your attitude to that device is. Do you see it as a friend? Do you see it as an enemy? At the end of the day, you've got a choice. Nobody is forcing you to see a device as a friend or as an enemy. But the important thing is that yes, you do have a choice, but you've got to make that choice. You can't put it off. These things are coming. If you're not seeing an uptake of mobile devices in your business now, you will do soon. Depending on who you talk to, it's estimated between 18 months and 4 or 5 years, more tablet devices will be sold than desktop and laptop computers. Right now, 18% or thereabouts of them are being sold to businesses, but those other 80-odd% are being sold, yes, some to education, to kids and what have you, but a lot of them are being sold to people who either now, or as they come out of university and college and school in the next 5 years, will be expecting to use them at work. And if you don't make a choice as to whether you see it as a friend, embrace it, see it as an enemy and something you need to do something about, and you just try and stick your head in the sand and pretend it's not going to happen, you're either going to risk losing talent or you're going to risk losing data. So it's up to you. You've got that choice. You need to make it though. Decide what your attitude is.